The following program is a UW-TV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection with Al Page. Our guest is Jim Lehrer, Associate Editor and co-anchor of the MacNeil Lehrer Newshour. And we begin with introductory comments from Richard Labunsky, Assistant Professor, School of Communications at the University of Washington.
The MacNeil Lehrer Newshour does a lot of things extremely well. One of the things, of course, it has going for it is that it's an hour long, and that makes it different from the commercial networks, and they're so limited, of course, in what they can do in the commercial TV side. They have very bright, experienced journalists. They are excellent at interviewing. Their outside stuff, the field reports they do from various parts of the country and the world are often very well done and run somewhat longer than a network production, a commercial network. But they also interview so very well. They are so good at listening to people, and they are really able to get to the heart of the issue in a very short period of time. One of the other things I also think they do extremely well is they always seem to have the right people there. They don't always go for politicians, always for well-known names. They often interview rather ordinary people who turn out to be very articulate on the subject that's being discussed. So I think all three of the MacNeil Lehrer people ask very good questions and do very good interviews.
Can you ever portray any news story accurately? Is there such a thing as accuracy in the news?
Yes, there is. But it's accurate from minute to minute, 30 minutes to 30 minutes, hour to hour. What's maybe accurate now, as you and I are speaking, may be inaccurate, talking from a news standpoint, 30 minutes from now. And you've always got to remember in journalism that you're not in the history business. You're not in the political science business. You're not in the philosophy business. You're in the business of saying what is accurate as best you can know and find out at the moment you report it.
When you're talking about accuracy, are you talking just about facts or something behind the facts?
I'm talking about facts. I'm not talking about the truth. I'm not talking about any of those deep things. Let's say that I'm interviewing you, and I ask you, what's your home address? I write down your home address, and you say it's 633 Apple Street. When I get back to the office, and I write it down, and I made it, it looks like an 8, and I say 638 Apple Street. I think that's accurate, because that's how I read my note. I write it, goes in the newspaper, goes on television or whatever, and it's inaccurate. It's wrong. It's factually inaccurate. And it was accurate when I wrote it down, but it was inaccurate when I reported it. I mean, accuracy is a word that we use in our business rather loosely, because accuracy is a loose commodity.
But to carry the analogy, how do you know that I'm telling you the right address?
That's not my problem. My problem is, as long as I explain to the audience or to the reader, look, I'm interviewing Al Page. Al Page told me his address was. It's attributed to you. That's the best I can do. I am not going to, unless it's some major investigation, I'm not going to go out and double check and say, you know, if you really know where you live or whether you're lying about it, unless that's the nature of the story.
But it's also a function of the time you have, whether you have the time to check.
That's it, exactly. And the attribution is 90% of this. If you blame it on somebody or you attribute it to somebody,
it's their fault.
That covers, well, it's not so much fault, it's just that the audience needs to know where you got the information. And they can judge it themselves. For instance, forget address. Let's say you've been accused of something and Page denied that. Well, then the audience says, okay, Page denied that. I'm not saying that Page is innocent. All I'm saying is Page says he's innocent. Okay, the audience can take that with whatever grain of salt or believability they want to, depending on what credibility you have with them. Sorry to make this personal, but
no problem.
I had to have an example.
I deny I gave you my wrong address. You talked at the beginning about time, a 4-minute, 8-minute, 12-minute story. How do you know how to bound a story to allocate 4 minutes or to allocate 8 minutes?
That's a result of experience and what is commonly referred to as craft. It's not a profession. There's no mysteries, no mystique involved.
Is craft just another name for guts?
No. It's just that if you have made the same kinds of decisions many times, then theoretically you get better at making those decisions over a period of time. Here's the problem, though, in the news business. I'll tell you, you got time for a long story? I'll make it quick. I was a reporter Dallas Times-Herald. I'd been working on an investigation involving, this was after the Kennedy assassination, about the fact that J. Edgar Hoover had reassigned and demoted 3 agents because of what they had done before, because they hadn't found Oswald, they had done something. It was a big story, and I finally confirmed it, whatever. The paper decided to run it and lead the newspaper with it, lead the paper with it one day, big copyrighted story. I finished the thing, then I got on an airplane to go cover Barry Goldwater, who was running for President of the United States, and he was campaigning in South Texas. By the time I got off the airplane, the Red Chinese had fired off the first atom bomb, so my story was knocked down, you know, to the off lead. There had 7 editions. Also, just to make a long end of that, it was also the day that Khrushchev was removed from office.
There goes the Pulitzer.
Right, and now my story is below the fold. And something else, I don't remember what else, but by the time the day was over, my little story, you know, was barely legible in my newspaper. And my point being that news is news based on also in relationship to what other news is on a given day. So there are people that are spending millions of dollars to get advice from people saying, well, now, when should we break this story? When should, you know, well, announce it on Sunday night because of this and that, and every time you do that, then there'll be a tornado that'll wipe out the East Coast or something, so you never can guess.
But when you're talking about craft, I'm still not sure what you mean. You don't get feedback on this, or do you?
Not on this kind of thing, you don't.
But do you get feedback on MacNeil Lehrer? This piece was too long, this piece was too short.
You can't worry about, somebody says, look, you didn't devote enough time to a certain story because it was more important, and there was use your 8 minutes. Hey, you only devoted 4 minutes to that, you should have devoted 8 because it was more important. Well, there's nothing worse than deciding a story is worth 12 minutes and then being halfway through it on the air and realizing it was only worth 6. That happens.
But rarely.
Well, you know, it's the old story about trying to put 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. The reverse is much worse, trying to put 5 pounds in a 10-pound bag. I mean, in this business, live television, wow, that's devastating.
We've been talking about facts, but how do you tell which facts to put on the air as opposed to speculation or theories about how those facts occurred and how they should be organized?
Well, here again, it's something you do for over a long period. I've been doing this for 27 years. That doesn't mean I'm right. But it means that I've had a lot of experience making those kinds of judgments as to whether, all right, now this falls into the area of opinion. So that has to be clearly marked, and then you also have to make decisions. Was this person a legitimate opinion utterer?
Right.
I mean, does this person deserve our attention on this particular issue? So you make those judgment calls, and I figure. I'm speaking only of myself now. I've been in this business as long as I have. I figure I'm right about 75% of the time.
But again, how do you know? What feedback are you getting?
I don't.
So you're guessing?
Well, no, I'm not guessing. I know that we make a decision tonight to do a certain program, to say we're going to have 3 stories. Mm-hmm. But every story is in competition with, say, 3 other stories. And we decide, no, we're not going to do that story. Now we're going to do this story. And then we do it, and that was a mistake. We should have done the other one. But you never know. You never have the option. You know, when something's thrown away, or you decide not to do it, you don't know. But you know in your own mind, you just made a mistake. We just made a bad judgment. As I say, I figure I'm right 3/4 of the time. That means I'm wrong 1/4 of the time, and that's heavy. I mean, you know, I mean, if you're a doctor, that's a bad record. You know, but in journalism, that's on a daily basis making these decisions. I'm comfortable with that. But I know that I'm going to be wrong a certain percentage of the time.
And you learn to live with it.
Learn to live with it. Learn to try very hard to try to knock it down to 24% or 23%.
How do you know what guest to interview? Someone in the public eye might not have the best information about the story. How do you make those trade-offs?
If you bring somebody on, you say, hey, look, the story is the Middle East, and we've got this guy named Sami Sue Abdul on, okay? You got to tell your audience why you're having the person on. This person we're having this person on because he or she has done this, has a background. It's not somebody in off the street unless you say, this person knows anything about this subject, but it has something interesting, it's the best I could do tonight, or the person has something interesting to say. And the problem here, and you've touched on it in your question, is that you end up going to people who are well known but who may not have great insights. And so you have to balance this thing. And and always trying to bring new people, new voices, new faces into our mix. It's difficult to do, particularly on a breaking story, because you want to go with sure things. You know that Sammy Sue believes this. You know Billy Bob believes that. They've been on the program before. Let's bring them on and let them fight again about a new development. And but we have to always remind ourselves that we got to be looking for people, new people all the time. We do it.
But you must know of people who have a lot of expertise, but they just don't look good on television. What do you do with those people?
That's the toughest call of all, because we feel that fairness to an idea goes beyond just having somebody on. That I say, okay, now here's the other side from Billy Bob, and Billy Bob can't get 2 words out. You say, well, that's not my problem. It is my problem, because our obligation is the fairness to the ideas, not to the individuals. And so you have somebody on who's incoherent or can't hold their own against the other side. That's being unfair, in my opinion. So you have to consider whether or not a person, the #1 expert on grain elevator safety, may be incoherent. You may have to go to the #2, or you may have to go to the #3. And there are trade-offs you have to make, and I think it's legitimate if you're doing live television.
When you interview someone, can you tell if they're responding to what they think you want to hear as opposed to what they really think?
I'm sure people do it, but people come to say what they're going to say. There are some folks, and it's kind of smart in a way. I mean, if no matter what the answer, no matter what the question is, they're going to say what they came to say. It took us a long time to figure that out, and we've wasted a lot of time. Because, but now we know we have our reporters, and they do a pre-interview and say, and sometimes they say at the bottom, no matter what you ask this guy, he's going to say boom boom. So you work with that. You figure out a way, get it out of the way at the top if that's the case. But deal with it, and because people have the right to do that. I mean, they have a right to play their own play. You know, I mean, we're here again. It's no mystery. We're not trying to beat up on folks.
But in a sense, the story that gets on the air is shaped by the very guests that you choose.
Oh, sure. But that's our craft. I mean, tonight, for instance, we're on any given night, but tonight we may be dealing with something having to do with a procurement scandal at the Department of Defense. We decide we may have 4 different guests on.
And that could happen any given night anyway.
That could happen any given night because there could be a scandal in the defense procurement business. Certainly by the selection of guests, we have shaped the story. But I mean, that's what we do that intentionally. But we're trying to make sure that all the bases are covered at or at least any given piece of it. It's almost like constructing a documentary in television terms, or a written news story for a newspaper or magazine. The only thing is we're doing it with live guests, where you go from A to B to C.
Tremendous time pressure.
You bet, you bet.
Have you ever had a story that you haven't been able to figure out how to shape under that tremendous time pressure? You know, you've got to get it on the air tonight, but you just don't know what to do with it.
No. There have been times when we've been frustrated and getting the right folks, but we take the position that usually the stories that are difficult to do on television are those that don't have pictures. But see, that's not our problem. We're not interested. I mean, we would never not do a story because we don't have a picture. You know, somebody stealing, a wrench, off of Air Force fighters, I mean, like that, or people exchanging secrets in the hallway. I mean, we do believe in the talking head. As MacNeil says, all information that's transmitted between human beings that's important is transmitted from one talking head to the other. So we're not. That's not a problem. The problem.
You're not going undercover in the Pentagon.
No, and so that's not. It's not the problem. The frustration comes in not getting the right not getting the right talking head on the right night, talking about the right problem.
But that brings us back to this issue of guests. Is it hard not to tilt stories towards guests who are most verbal?
No, that's no problem. We don't think of those. I mean, I can't recall in 12 and a half, almost 13 years, where we ever said, well, we'll do that story because Billy Bob is particularly articulate. I mean, we've made a lot of mistakes, but that's one that we've never made that I'm aware of.
Let's change the subject slightly. There are thousands of people who report the news in print, on the air. In what way is one reporter better than another reporter?
Well, the best reporters are those who are experienced at hearing the click. Now, the click is when you know you have the story. And some people think they have it when they haven't got it. Some people never hear the click, they never get the story. And it's, some people, an experienced reporter is you may make 2 phone calls, I got it. The next story, 202 calls, and you still don't have it. So you make the 203 or whatever. And the difference between reporters, the good ones and the bad ones, is when they know they have it, when the click comes. And there's some people who are very young and can figure it out, and there's some people who can be in this business forever and never quite get it right.
When you're hiring reporters, how can you tell who has the click and who hasn't?
You can't. You can't from the beginning. You can only. It's not something you're born with. You know, it's not. We're not talking about professional basketball here. I mean, it's something that can be learned very quickly.
Can you learn it in a school, or do you have to learn it on the street?
You can learn it in school. You go to the right school and you got the right teachers. But out in the street, you learn it just because you get fired if you screw it up. And in school, you get it. I went to a journalism school, which a lot of people think are lousy places to go learn journalism. I happened to go to a journalism school where they gave you an F if you got the middle initial wrong or you got an address wrong in a story. That happens to you if you, no matter how great the story, how great you wrote the story, you just get a couple of facts wrong and you've had it. They just give you an F. And I thought, this is outrageous. I went to this school thinking I was Ernest Hemingway, and he's a great writer, and I'd write these great stories. And I remember one time I wrote this wonderful story, and I literally got a middle initial wrong, and the guy gave me an F. And I remember that to this day, and I've always remembered that. And I worked for a city editor, you know, I started writing obits like everybody did. And you get a couple things wrong in an obit. Well, you're talking about the most sensitive thing in a newspaper. That's why they start you there, because the world comes down on you. And that's the other thing you have to learn as a reporter. The difference, a reporter, difference between a good reporter and a bad reporter, somebody who is careless with the facts in a way in direct proportion to how important the person is. In other words, we every once in a while get some young folks who come around here and start mouthing off about the president, whoever the president is. You know, oh, well, no. Usually that means they haven't had to deal with the consequences of their reporting. You start at the courthouse or the city hall, where you write a story, and you have to go back to the courthouse the next day, and you have to look the guy in the eye. You know, well, the President of the United States deserves the same kind of treatment that you give the person at the courthouse. And you have to learn that somewhere. And you have to learn to deal with the consequences of your journalism. And you can learn it in school, or you can learn it in a small radio station, you can learn it in a small newspaper, or whatever. But if you don't learn it, you ought to be run out of the business on a rail. Because when you sit there, you better see, you know, who you're writing it for. And you've got, you know, the power is there. And it's, people don't realize, here's the person you ought to shy away from. I warned you that my answers are long. People you want to shy away in journalism who say to you, oh, well, I don't have any power, I'm just reporting the news. That is absolute crap.
Why?
I can do a story tonight on our program and destroy somebody's reputation. I can do a story on tonight's program and I can make somebody's reputation. The power doesn't mean that I'm not talking about making up stories either. I'm talking about real stories and just the way you, I mean, the power to affect the thing is gigantic. And it's a power that everybody involved in this business should understand they have and use it gingerly and professionally. And people who don't ought to be run out of here.
Time out. I want to change the subject. You deliver the news, you write fiction. Is truth stranger than fiction?
No, but O. Henry, William Sidney Porter once said, he was a newspaper man, and then he became a fiction writer.
He certainly was.
Yes, indeed. And he said the only place you can really tell the truth is in fiction.
Did you ever figure out what the hell he meant by that?
Well, what he meant was that, going back to our earlier conversation about facts and accuracy and all of that, I don't consider, you know, the truth is everything. I mean, the truth is why people do things and all of that. You cannot really do that in nonfiction or in the journalism, but you can do that in fiction. My interest in fiction is one that has always coincided with my interest in journalism. The two went together. I'm a Hemingway type. In other words, go into the newspaper business, you know, make a living, get some experience, deal with the language, and write fiction and nonfiction at the same time, that the two complement each other. Now, that's not the way it's considered now. People go into academia and stay in colleges and write fiction. But my generation, it was a natural act to be both a fiction writer and a journalist. Now it's considered an unnatural act.
Can you feel more freedom when you're doing fiction? Can you express yourself more?
Well, not really. You know, if you're an honest fiction writer, and I'm certainly an honest fiction writer, you create a character, and the parameters. There are restrictions there. Once you create the character in a situation, there are limits to what you can do. Just like there are limits when you write a news story. For instance, when I sit down to write a news story every evening, I've got, you know, a couple wire stories and some background stuff, and maybe a pre-interview, and I'm bound by that. I can't go beyond that. In fiction, you've got similar kinds of things. The difference is you set the parameters yourself. Once you set them, then you are stuck with them.
But in fiction, you can rewrite.
Oh, sure. And you can change the parameters. But to be honest, once you get started, and for the thing to ring true once you get started, you've got to stay with it. But the difference is you set them to begin with. And AP and Reuters are doing it on the nonfiction.
Does fiction allow you to articulate emotions that you can't articulate on television?
Oh, certainly. Oh, certainly. It allows you to play with the language more, and it allows you to, in my case at least, I get very carried away with, you know, you set up a situation, you got 2 people, 3 people, 10 people, and allow it to just carry itself for a while, and that's very exciting.
It's exciting, but is it also frustrating because you can't ever completely get someone to see or feel the emotions that you're feeling, that you're writing about?
No. You mean in the fiction writing or the nonfiction?
In the fiction.
In the fiction. No, that's the great pleasure is in playing with it and seeing if you can do that. Oh, it's frustrating when it doesn't work. The most frustrating thing of all about fiction writing is having a really good idea and not being able to pull it off, not being a good enough writer, and that's a continual frustration for me, and it always will be. I mean, I'm not as good a writer as I wish I could write better. You know, I'm working at it very hard, and I keep trying to improve, but I'll never be as good as I wish I were.
The interesting thing about what you're doing on the fiction side is that you're taking a lot of risks. MacNeil Lehrer is safe, and you've got a closet full of awards. But on the other side, if I can say this gently, critics have been fairly kind with respect to the books, but you've had mixed reviews with respect to the plays. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with a bad review?
Well, as Richard Ford, the novelist, a friend of mine, lives in Montana, said, "Criticize my work, and you make an enemy for life." Actually, I've only had one really awful review on my plays, and that happened to be in the Washington Post, at a play that was running at the Kennedy Center, and it was devastating. Devastating to the play, devastating to everybody involved, and particularly to me.
Must have hurt.
Oh yeah, sure it did. But all the other reviews of that play were favorable. There was one that was kind of mixed, but the other ones were all favorable. There is no such thing as a good bad review. I mean, and the question you're asking really is, why do I expose myself to this kind of thing?
Exactly.
And after I got that after I get a bad review, I wonder to myself, why am I doing this to myself? And I can't stop it. I mean, it's you can't have it both ways. You cannot. I have decided I want to write fiction, and when you write fiction, whether it's on the stage or whether it's for prose, then you open yourself up for criticism, and it really hurts when somebody says that you know, something less than favorable. I mean, as MacNeil says, grace under praise is an easy thing to accomplish. Grace under criticism is extremely difficult. I don't handle it very well. Never will. Don't know anybody in this business who does, to tell you the truth. No, it's what I've signed on to do, so I've got to accept it. Don't particularly like it, but I have to accept it.
People argue that you shouldn't pay attention to the reviews when they're good, because then you have to pay attention to them when they're bad.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I don't read. I don't even read all the reviews. It's just because once something is over, I want it to be over. Now, on Kick the Can, the book I was mentioning, I've got, with a couple of exceptions, it got universally very, very well reviewed. But what does that mean? What it means is that that helps the next book, and and all of that. I don't know. There are very few people who have ever written fiction who have gotten every review everything they've ever written about has been universally reviewed well. So I mean, that's the name of the game. I'm just not grown up yet. It still hurts.
If your next book, a sort of son of your novel, Kick the Can, made bundles and bundles of money, would you be tempted to quit the news business, just go at fiction full time?
I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not there yet. Right now I've got my cake and I'm eating it too. It's wonderful. I mean, I can do my daily news program, which I thoroughly enjoyed doing, and I can also write my fiction. If I get to a point where I have to make a choice, I mean, you put it in the best positive way, because I'm a millionaire and I don't need to work anymore. Would I write full time? I honestly don't know, because I'm not confronted with that situation, and if it happens, I will see. I know. Let's put it this way: I know I would not give up my fiction writing. So if I decided to give up one or the other, yes, I would give up the television before I'd give up the fiction writing. But
have you had a sense that the fiction writing has made you a better journalist?
I'm sure there's leakage back and forth. More conscious of emotions and people. I'm very conscious of people's right to be treated fairly and all of that. And fiction writing takes you more into people's psyche and all of that. And maybe I'm not conscious of it. It's a good point, but I haven't really thought about it.
10 years from now, do you have a sense of what you're going to be doing, or are you just taking it 1 year at a time?
Oh yeah. You know, I had a health problem a few years back, and that reminded me that I only take it a little bit at a time. I don't think in terms anymore of long periods of time. I'm really very much enjoying what I'm doing now, and in every aspect of my life, not just my professional, not just my fiction. My personal life is A-okay as well too, and you know, and I'm sure it'll continue this way. And I don't think about what I'll be doing 10 years from now. I know I'll be doing something, and it'll be enjoyable, or I won't be doing it.
If Robin MacNeil is watching this show, anything you want to say to him?
Good night, Robin.
Jim Lehrer, Associate Editor and co-anchor, the MacNeil-Lehrer Newshour, upon reflection.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.